So Battlefield Redsec is here, and whether or not you're a brand new player to the recent Battlefield 6 gameplay, or you're jumping in from having spent hours upon hours since launch playing, today I wanted to examine a bit of an updated settings video for you to help ease some of that transition, or perhaps again, initial entry into this version of the game. There have been some minor adjustments and tweaks fundamentally, not just to my own personal settings, that even if you've seen the last guide that we had around Battlefield 6's launch, it's worth double checking to make sure everything of yours is up to date. And not to mention, I had also noticed a few of my settings had been changed with the update itself for Season 1, which was odd, but was a nice reminder to periodically check what I've got set. So drop your thoughts as we go along, drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button if you enjoy Battlefield 6, Arc Raiders, and other FPS content. We're chasing down 700,000 subscribers, and I'd love to have you in the community. But for now, let's get into it. So the one thing that we should address is some major issues that we've seen since the launch of Battlefield 6, some of these having some fixes, some of them still having updates on the horizon. The first of which deals with dead zones. Now, the first I saw of this was over on Reddit in a now strangely deleted post, but it outlined the strange approach that dead zones had in Battlefield 6, the zones being set in a sort of squared radius rather than the standard circular zoning you'd see in most games. So what this would mean is that in practicality, that there was this very good chance you'd have precise inputs that would only go horizontal or vertical outwards to a degree of input. So until you started pushing more and more on that thumbstick and then would likely overshoot, you wouldn't be able to make any adjustments at like a 45-degree angle or anything other than 90-degree transitions. Up close and personal, you won't really notice it all that much, but when you're trying to aim at anything and make those slight adjustments at range of like, let's say 30 to 50 meters at a base, you're gonna start noticing that your aim is just feeling off. Now, adjusting your axial dead zones can be a way to mitigate this, however, at the moment, by lowering your center dead zone to 0 and an axial dead zone to some form of a lower number, like a 1.5 to a 2.5, still having some sort of dead zone there, just so a slight breeze on your controller or thumbstick doesn't cause any movement, but these seem to slightly mitigate that current underlying issue, which, for many, appears that this could be an issue currently only on PC with Sony controllers. And as that this is the primary location where I personally play, it's possible this may be a lesser issue than I often think, that maybe it's an echo chamber issue. But according to Julian Manilov, Battlefield 6's core combat and gameplay engineer, this is an oddball issue where he stated, "We have a low-level compatibility issue with Sony controllers on PC right now. The dead zone you feel, it's actually 10% stick range cut, being applied before the dead zone support of the game itself. We're working to get it resolved ASAP, and that it's a 10% by 10% dead square in the raw controller data, which means it doesn't blend and the axis just insta-jumps from 0 to 11% when it crosses that 10% motion threshold." So hearing this is kind of nice because like for the longest time I thought I was just crazy, but it does appear to be an actual issue. Another thing that has been problematic since launch is the sort of controller stickiness on enemies, but like not in a good way. This deals with the infantry aim assist slowdown. The lesser the value, the lesser the pull on the enemy you'll see, which in theory, it sounds weird to adjust it and voluntarily lower that strength of aim assist, but the defaulted 100 sticks way too much without accounting for the motion of players, just the initial crossover of their outline, and when considering those controller and dead zone problems, again, this is just one of those things that compounds where it feels like you're overshooting everything in those adjustments for your weapon aim. This will vary depending on what feels good to you, but I'd recommend jumping into the firing range and trying to lower that value of the infantry aim assist slowdown. But that said, let's talk about some updated settings you should definitely be taking into consideration and adjusting, starting out with your camera effects. This is probably one of the biggest cluster of settings you'll find that in one area you'd kind of want to adjust all of these. World motion blur and weapon motion blur, turn these off. I know for some people it may not seem like a huge issue, but I present to you a side-by-side of camera pans from your perspective with weapon motion blur on versus it off. Closer distances, maybe not a problem, but when you're playing for Redsec, a map that is likely to have plenty of players at a long distance for those gunfights, they could spot you before you spot them. That blur then turns those players into another piece of foliage off in the distance where you don't spot them quick, bam, you're dead. So you're going to really want to turn this off for better visibility. Infantry HUD motion, this just means your HUD will bob a bit. You can keep that stationary by turning it off. Camera shake amount, drop that to its lowest value of 50. This allowing you for things like explosions and everything to not mess with your HUD or anything. Reduce sprint camera bobbing, turn that on. In the initial setting video, I misread my notes, mistakenly saying to turn it off because I mean, every single other element of this section was to either turn it off or on its lowest setting. So I didn't catch that mistake until after we published it. I hate myself for that one. one. But yeah, turn that on to have a bit more stabilization. Chromatic aberration, turn that off. This attempts to make things a bit more cinematic by blurring the edges of objects, and just it makes them a bit more blended and not great for visibility. So turn that off. And infantry crosshair projection, turn this off. This means your crosshair will always be in the center of your screen and not deviating with any motion pan or situation where you have a bit of shake of some kind. For controller-specific settings, you want to take a look at, firstly, infantry aim sensitivity. This is all a personal preference thing. Like, my sensitivity is probably not going to be the best case scenario for maybe you or somebody else. So for that, I'd recommend just tweaking that a little bit incrementally and then going into the firing range, trying to see how quickly you can snap to the different targets. Field of view, again, personal, but it is something that does make quite the bit of difference, both speaking visually, giving more peripheral vision, but also you have to take into account that the wider that field of view, the more impact it's going to have slightly on your aim itself. Vertical aim ratio, uniform infantry aiming, and zoom sensitivity coefficients. These have all changed by default since the beta and were there for launch. These defaulted ones are not all that bad. Honestly, I kind of recommend them, along with I've seen a lot of other creators talk about that as well. Infantry aim input curve. Personally, I believe that you want to have the Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 4 setting for both input curve and zoom input curve, while the stick input acceleration is Battlefield 4, 3, and Bad Company. The stick input acceleration presets, however, you'll want a value of around 20 as a sort of mid-ground where you're not needing to push too far on that stick to compensate for that acceleration, and you're not zooming past your target by having it the opposite way. Your zooms, all defaulted for me personally. I don't like to have that zoom slow down. I feel like it messes with my feeling of aiming when I come out of zoom to a different weapon, but again, that's subjective. Try that out within the firing range if you'd like. Uniform infantry aiming on mouse and keys is one of those things that has gotten a lot of discussion since launch. Some swearing it's placebo, some swearing it's the real deal. But if you want to test it out for yourself, a before and after, you want to turn off uniform infantry aiming and then adjust the zoom transition sensitivity smoothing. Again, this is one of those things that people swear it's just placebo. Some people swear it's legitimate. If you're feeling a little off on mouse and keys, it doesn't hurt to try it out. As for some other settings that are definitely important here, one of the big ones with Battle Royale is your interact priority. This, you end up having various different options, where in the multiplayer experience, I recommended having prioritize reload. Instead, with the Battle Royale, I would prioritize interacting, because unless you're playing on mouse and keys where you can just spam your pickup key, you're going to want to end up just tapping to be able to pick up those items with your controller rather than holding down to interact with that. Whereas, while I love having the ability to just simply tap to reload, I'm going to, in those situations where I'm closer to a bunch of different items, I'm likely not going to be reloading a whole ton in and among a ton of different loot. If I'm around a bunch of chests, if I'm trying to pick up loot off of a dead body or something like that, I'll probably be wanting to get in and out of that area as quick as possible, and just simply tapping will shave off some time that could save your life in that. And not to mention, it's a prioritize, so you will still have the ability to tap to reload if that's something that you do find beneficial, but it's just if you're like looking at an item and in that vicinity where you can pick it up, it will prioritize the tap going to picking up or interacting with the item rather than the reload. So you do have to kind of be conscious of it, but you'll still have essentially both of those same features still available. Parachute auto deploy, I would change this to tethered only, so you end up having the ability to manually decide and give you that control over your shoot. Skip and request revive. I honestly, again, I think that request as a toggle is the smarter play here, just because that allows you then to prolong that bleed out without having to hold down any sort of revive request. Minimap sizing and adjustments you can also change to your liking, but only in those smaller certain areas. You can't like change the position or anything like that, unfortunately. And finally, for controls overall with like your button layouts and everything, this is where it's kind of convoluted here at this one. Soldier, I'd play alternate, which is essentially your tactical button layout from Call of Duty, or if you're not comparing it, it just simply allows you to end up using your circle or B button on your right thumbstick, just swapping those two around, which is also very beneficial for sliding. Aircraft and helicopter, alternate allows you to throttle up and or down with your triggers rather than your sticks, which to me, I also prefer, but then the rest of the vehicles and gunners, they're the same layouts by default, accelerating and decelerating on the triggers, not the sticks. So that's your stuff that I play around with button layouts. Audio, your audio mix really depends on how you're listening. I don't quite know if stereo was adjusted or bugged. It was one of those things that was one of those settings that was automatically changed here whenever I end up booting into Redsec for the first time, where it felt off. I don't know if the setting itself was broken or if it was truly just like that much different for Redsec, but you have that whole suite of different settings where it truly depends on how you play, whether it's like a TV soundbar, a headset, some speakers on your desk. That is a case-by-case basis depending on what hardware the user has at their disposal. So try out a little bit of those, see what you guys like the most of. One silly little way that I play around with it is I go into the firing range and adjust this setting, because you end up having that little speaker on the table in the firing range playing the various different Battlefield themes. You can hear the differences in the ranges of the highs and lows and the different compression values on each of them. So that's just something that gives you like that real-time feedback. Voice chat right now, unfortunately, doesn't seem like it really matters all that much unless you're random queuing with people, because there doesn't appear to be any prox chat. I'm hoping that's changed, but if that's the case, if you come back to this like in a couple of months and there is prox chat actually updated and in the game, make sure you don't have an open mic on, because that will give you away if in close enough proximity to other players. But for the time being, again, doesn't have to worry about that. Graphical settings for my PC friends out there, you can check to see what affects your VRAM and CPU usage the most. Toning down some of those things like your different graphical qualities, those will decrease a little bit of how the game looks, but if you're caring about like frame rate or stuff, you can find a bunch of different settings that, again, depending on how much it affects your VRAM and your CPU usage, it will grant you a lot more frames than other settings and having those on. Additionally, you can play around with the frame rate limiter. That's entirely up to you. I don't ever cap mine. NVIDIA Reflex, low latency, on versus on plus boost is, again, very hardware dependent, but if you have a better GPU than CPU, on plus boost will use that GPU to reduce the latency by keeping clock speeds high, but on is better for CPU bound workloads. If you want upscaling, I've personally used DLSS, but that just depends, again, what works best with your current hardware. It's not necessarily a one size fits all thing. But anyways, those are some of the settings that I tweaked whenever I jumped back into Battlefield Redsec and what I was double checking whenever I saw that some of my settings did reset themselves or default back down to what they were by base. So want to share that with you guys because I had to do that mental run through again on everything. Hopefully this can help you out in any way, shape, or form. But that's where we're going to wrap it up. So drop your thoughts down below, drop a like if you enjoy the video, and make sure to subscribe for more Battlefield 6 and Battlefield Redsec coverage, along with other FPS content. Love to have you in the community. For now, though, thanks so much for watching. Mine has been Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care, and peace.